Hi, everybody. We're competing here with the first official day of summer in Britain, so thank you for being here. And my name is Julie Flynn Seiler. I'm the director of Jeniam Conversations at the Oxford Center for Life Writing at Wolfson College. The Jeniam Conversations are made possible by the Jeniam Foundation, which is a family foundation established by the Oxford graduate Andrew Clarkson to support conservation and deepen our understanding of the natural world through the arts. So this is the first of 3 conversations we've curated this term, and so thrilled to have these 2 with us, which is just great. Next Friday, May 29th, we'll have Jackie Kay, who is Scotland's former Makar. It's poet laureate, and she will be in conversation with Hermione Lee. And on June 10th, we've got Amy Tan from San Francisco, who will join the Oxford ethno-ornithologist Andy Gosler, and they'll talk about life writing and birds. So for those who are new to us, to OCLU, OCLU is a world-leading center for life writing, bringing together authors, scholars, and readers to explore, discuss, and write. This year marks our 15th anniversary, and none of it, including this series, would be possible without our donors. So if you'd like to be a part of what comes next, whether by supporting events like this one, or funding writers to develop new work, or bringing life writing into local schools and classrooms, you can give to our anniversary appeal via the QR code or during the wine reception following this conversation. And we're always glad to talk about other ways of getting involved. So, to the event we're just about to have. It's my genuine pleasure to introduce 2 writers who explore our relationship with the natural world with extraordinary sensitivity and skill. Chloe Dalton wrote Raising Hare during the pandemic after stepping back from a globe-trotting career as a foreign policy advisor to slow down and pay very close attention to a wild creature. I read her book last year when I was here in Oxford and found it very, very moving. Raising Hare went on to win the Wainwright Prize for Nature Writing and the Wainwright Prize Book of the Year, both in 2025. And Dr. Charlie Lee Potter, who holds 2 PhDs, has been exploring the natural world for many years as a BBC4, Radio 4 presenter, as a writer, as a podcaster, and as an artist. She's just been named, we're so proud of this, we've just been named the Jeffrey Garton Creative Arts Writing Fellow for 2026 to 27, and you can see some of her extraordinary work in the college by following the signs to the buttery. I really urge you to take a look at it. It's very special. My thanks to both of you so much for being here, and Charlie, over to you. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Julie. Hello, it's great to be here because we're going to be talking about a book which I know many of you love already, and those that haven't read it yet, it will be a beloved book when you have read it. It's that special. So, a plot spoiler, a hare is raised in this book, and we will go on to talk in more detail about how, why, and what the pitfalls are, of which there are some. But before we do that, and Julie's touched on it to a degree, let's just put you in your earlier context, which is that you're traveling all of the time, you're obsessed by foreign policy, you're advising world leaders, and actually you've grown entirely apart from what you ever knew about nature. So as the book opens, to what degree are you almost bewildered by that thing, and we'll hear you read this section in a minute, that urge that compels you to pick up a leveret, otherwise known as a baby hare?
Well, thank you so much for having me. I'm absolutely thrilled to be here. I was an undergrad at Oriel studying English, and I could never have imagined being invited back to speak on a stage like this and to have written a book. And yes, you're absolutely right. My background was entirely in politics and foreign policy, more foreign policy than politics. Politics was like a necessary evil as the vehicle through which I could trying to put forward ideas about what the UK could do in the world for good, which is how I saw my role. And the culmination of it, I suppose, after many years working in Parliament, was being Special Advisor to William Hague when he was Foreign Secretary. And so I spent 5 years in the Foreign Office, went to well over 50 countries in that space of time, travelled constantly. And then I left government, before Brexit, but then I definitely decided not to go back after Brexit. And I carried on doing this kind of work from outside government. So I was working for people who had different non-governmental platforms but were very well known trying to achieve things in foreign policy. So my life involved constant travel and constantly thinking about the world beyond the shores of the UK. And if I thought about nature, it was as something that was sort of over there and was being dealt with by other people who were expert in it. And I think I had a sort of bifurcated vision. I saw my work as being about humans. Obviously there's a big component of foreign policy that's to do with climate diplomacy and things like that, but that wasn't my field of interest. My area was war, conflict, terrorism, nuclear proliferation. I would be all over what's happening in Iran and the Straits of Hormuz, for example. So all of this is just a long-winded way of saying that when the pandemic struck and I found myself in the north of England so that I could be near my family, I really wasn't looking at the landscape around me. I knew I was lucky to be somewhere so beautiful. Most of my friends were still in small apartments in London, and I was surrounded by green landscape. But I did not notice hares. I know with hindsight there must have been countless hares around me, but I didn't even notice them. That's how unattuned I was to nature and to the animals that were scurrying around, flying around in the fields around me. So I am the most unlikely person to have had this experience and written a book about this, which I hope when I tell people is a sort of encouraging aspect of what you can do as a creative person with your experiences, even if they don't appear to mesh with your sort of professional background and training. So when I came across this little leveret, I had no idea that it would play any part in my life whatsoever. And when I finally intervened, it was with the thought that I would take it to safety for a couple of hours and then return it to the field. I did not anticipate a 4-year relationship with a wild animal.
It's interesting, isn't it? Because it's quite clear from the book that you still had these old instincts, perhaps inculcated in childhood, which was to look at this day-old minuscule hare. I mean, you describe it, its length is no greater than the width of your palm. Its front paws are as thin as pencils. Tiny thing. It weighs less than an apple.
Yes.
And yet something you dredged up which said, do not pick this up without covering it in grass in case you impart your scent to it. And if you then take it back into the wild, its mother may reject it. So there was something buried.
That came from, so when I was growing up, my dad, who's still alive, but he's retired now, he was a diplomat, and I grew up in the Middle East. I'm not sure if I write about it in the book very much, but it just meant that I was hardly in the UK, but I would come back, we'd come back for family holidays sometime in the summer, in the hottest time of the year in the Middle East. And I remember, actually must have been Easter, actually. I remember obviously one lambing season where I spent time as a young child on a farm, and I saw how in fact, no, but I think I do write about this, that if a sheep gives birth and her lambs die, and you have orphaned lambs from another mother, you can persuade the mother to adopt this orphan lamb as long as it doesn't smell of a different sheep, and so you go to great lengths to... So I think I'd had that in my mind from that childhood experience, this vague idea. Well, first and foremost, I knew that you don't go around picking up wild animals of any kind, or young wild animals, so I write in the book about that. Was my first instinct was not to interfere with this leveret, to leave it where it was. But then when I did, for various reasons I describe in the book, decide that I should and could intervene, I had this notion that if I avoided transferring my scent, I would be able to return it to the field, and in the hope that its mother would find it. So I think we all do. We carry around those almost sort of emotional resonances and touch points from childhood, whether they're in the form of sort of knowledge that you have that's buried, or even actually when I came to the writing of the book, things that I'd read in childhood, poetry, novels with a strong element of nature that ended up, without me being conscious of this, becoming part of my mental landscape when it came to how I approached the experience and how I wrote the book.
Well, should we hear you read the very opening section? And what you'll get from this, obviously, is the discovery of the leveret, but also you'll get a sense of the way that Chloe writes, because there's a huge drama at the beginning. There's wonderfully short sentences, and there's a sort of anxiety in the reader about how is this going to pan out. So really exquisitely observed, which, of course, the whole book is. So will you read that opening section?
With great pleasure, and thank you for that. So this is the prologue to the book. January was Arctic. The temperature frequently dropped to 5 degrees below zero. It started snowing in the new year and barely stopped before mid-February, when a brief thaw exposed the snowdrops pushing through the sodden grass. Within days, they were blanketed once more. The trees were frosted white with wind-blown snowflakes, while icy cobwebs hung in the hedgerows like frozen cats' cradles. A lone kestrel brooded on the garden fence, spectral in the dim light. Lean foxes patrolled the landscape, stalking gully and thicket, their boldness heightened by hunger. A patch of bloody, clotted down was all that remained of a plump wood pigeon, as if a bag of feathers had been upended on the ground. Bewildered pheasants crossed the fields, their tail feathers heavy with crusted snow, slow marching through the icy terrain, the this way of their perfect arrow-shaped tracks leading off into the distance and then disappearing. Throughout those frozen weeks, a hare bounded through the fields, her movements slowed by new life growing within her. As the low winter sun clung to the horizon, she huddled close to the ground in any cover she could find, sheltering from the bitter wind and the ravening gaze of predators. By night, she scraped at the snow with her forepaws to uncover shoots of grass amid the corn stubble, or chewed bare bark in the hedgerows, scant sources of energy to ward off the chill and sustain her unborn litter through the 42 days and nights of a hare's term. One February night, the hare formed a nest in an overhang of tall grass at the edge of a field. There she gave birth silently under the moonlight to a leveret as dark as the night itself, save for a star-shaped white mark on its forehead. She licked it clean and then fed it, shielding it with her body until it had found use of its limbs, before nudging it anxiously out of its birthplace with her muzzle into a new hiding place within a dense tussock of dormant grass that created a snug tent around the little leveret. Having concealed it to her satisfaction, the mother hare went back over her tracks, using the tips of her paws to obliterate her traces, racing to beat the dawn light breaking on the horizon. She moved with graceful springing steps, as if to avoid turning a single blade. Once finished, she sprang away with a thrust of her powerful back legs, putting clear ground between her and her young. With no burrow in which to hide her leveret, the best she could do was to leave it, drawing off predators until nightfall, when she would return again under cover of darkness. In the hours that followed, winter relented and eased its grip. The boggy ground bubbled with snowmelt. Humans re-emerged gratefully outdoors. The tiny leveret with the white star on its head huddled in its grass nest, shrinking closer to the ground and listening intently to the sound of distant voices traveling on the wind, growing steadily closer, along with something else, the plashing paws, panting breath, and musky smell of an approaching dog, racing across the ground towards the leveret's hide and rending the air with a terrifying, exultant bark.
Thank you. You see what I mean about this drama that's built, and each successive chapter has that sense of sort of driving through to the next series of episodes that you describe. There'll be lots of people here who are working on life writing or writing fiction. But what point did you decide that this could be a work of non-fiction nature writing? Because there's a huge protective loyalty that emerges from the pages, from you to the hare. Was there a point at which you thought, am I entitled to tell the story of this hare? What will happen if I do?
Well, the first thing to say is obviously the bit that I've read is fiction. And I had a bit of a shock when I came to writing the book, and which we might discuss how it came about in case it's helpful to anyone who's trying to get a publishing contract, things like that. But when I was told by my publisher that I was writing narrative non-fiction in the nature writing genre, I had to look up all of those terms, and then I went to a bookshop and I saw this gigantic wall of nature writing with these very famous largely male names, and I just spun on my heel and decided to leave. And I just thought, if I start looking at what this whole genre is, I will feel ill-equipped to do this. And I was ill-equipped to do this. I wrote for other people. I'd never dreamt of writing a book. So I think so my point is, I think rather than seeing myself as being part of a kind of genre, I tried to write a story. And that's the only part of the book where I take, I hope, artistic license with trying to imagine the circumstances of the hare's birth based on what I then went on to observe of how the hare herself raised her young. But I really wrestled with the idea. I had no conception I was going to write a book. The hare was more than 2 years old before I even started really talking about it to outsiders. And someone suggested to me that I should write a book. And I wrestled with it because I had this terrible feeling that I have been given such an extraordinary gift from nature that I don't deserve, this extraordinary opportunity to live alongside a wild animal that chose to trust me and to raise her young alongside me and to live freely between my house and the wild. That having been given that, would writing a book about it be somehow harmful to the hares? I don't in the book say where the story is set, where I live. And that's partly because I wanted it to feel to the reader that it could be them, because I am an every woman. But also it's because I have this fear that someone might come along and decide out of spite to kill all the hares. It's a very small population, and that happens quite a lot up and down the country. So it wasn't a sort of blindingly obvious step to take. And if someone hadn't said to me, you should write this as a book, and then answered my next question, which is, what do I have to do? How do you go about this? And I was told, you have to write a publishing proposal, and what does that look like? If I didn't have someone to sort of tease that out of me and give me some assistance about how to do that, I probably wouldn't have done it. And I still, to this day, I worry, have I taken something from the hares? And I try to offset that in my own mind by doing everything I can to actually campaign for better protection for hares, and to be clear that hares are not pets. They should never be treated as pets. They belong in the wild. And I still don't know to this day if I did exactly the right thing in intervening in the hare's life in the way that I did. But having done it, I've tried very hard not to do any harm.
We go on to talk about the dangers that the hare population of this country faces, which is extreme. But I think we need to think, first of all, day 1, day 2, day 3, first month, what are you going to feed this hare? And there's a fascinating description of you talking to your sister and thinking that perhaps the food, the milk substitute that you would wean a kitten with might be good, or something that you might give a lamb. But there is no manual. You try and find information. There is no information. So you start off with this kitten food, but absolutely unable to be sure that you are doing the right thing. Just one more reading. I'd love, again, to give you a sense of the beauty of the descriptions. That reading, when you describe, you'll never look at a raspberry again when you hear this one. Yeah. Trying to work out what the hare will eat, but then giving the hare a raspberry.
Yes, this was obviously when the hare was a little bit older, when she was weaned and she was eating other things other than milk, which she was dependent on for the first month or so of her life. But because my background's in politics and I'm used to researching things, I did what I would do if I was writing a speech for the Foreign Secretary travelling overseas. I ordered all the books I could find about hares, and found all sorts of really useful ideas in some surprising places, including the poems of William Cooper, who I bet you all know, Epitaph on a Hare. But Cooper's essays had some really good tips for what to feed a hare, and it was he who suggested that they liked raspberries. So anyway, am I starting here, this bit here?
Yes.
Yeah, okay. So, and I should clarify at this point that for the first year of the hare's life, I had no idea whether it was male or female. Obviously she is a she, but at this point in the story, I refer to her as it because I didn't know. It never gorged itself, eating sparingly for a few moments from the edge of a bowl, and always spending more time eating grass in the garden than feeding in the house. It adored clover and would bury itself in the deepest patches until only the tips of its ears could be seen, foraging freely for the plants that it had spurned when I cut them, preferring to crop them fresh from the ground. The rough grass was rich in buttercups and dandelions, and the leveret amused me with its careful eating habits. Grass it would eat from the tip of the blade down to the stem, flowers the reverse. It would snip dandelions off at the root and gradually draw the stem into its mouth until the vivid yellow petals hovered at its muzzle, whereupon it would sever the flower head and let it fall neatly by its paws. I tried to be scrupulous about germs, both those I might pass on to the leveret and those it might conceivably carry, washing my hands before and after I touched it, sterilizing food bowls and surfaces every day, and mopping the wooden floors. By the way, I don't think this is the raspberry episode. Have I read the wrong bit?
It's around about page 51, I think.
Yeah. Sorry, I've just suddenly got deep into this and realised that this is not the bit.
There's no raspberry.
I don't think the raspberry's here. Oh, here we go. Just going to backtrack a few paragraphs. Just hold that thought. There we go, here we go. Okay, fine, sorry. It's because I read it from there. Excuse me. Right, this is very short. It's just one paragraph. The leveret was particular in its tastes. A ripe strawberry left out to tempt it was disregarded, but it loved an occasional raspberry. The sticky, squishy sound of a hare eating a raspberry has to be heard to be believed. Since hares don't use their paws to help them eat in the way that dogs or parrots grip their food at times to gain a better purchase, it would pick up the thimble-shaped cone in its mouth by one edge and slowly mash its jaws, drawing it in bead by bead while the raspberry bobbed up and down in front of its nose. There was something serious, almost ponderous, in the slow and methodical manner in which the leveret ate a berry. Sorry, I got there.
Thank you. I love that. But I also love the fact that, as you already touched on, it's William Cooper's poem that is the key. All these books that arrive from the London Library, neither use nor ornament, as they say. Most of them are about how you can cook and eat a hare. So there's recipes for hare with bread and blood. But then William Cooper's poem says, try porridge oats. And the hare loves the porridge oats. Interestingly, though, because William Cooper loved his hares, yes. he had 3, but he did lead you astray in the sense that he kept his hares in hutches, and a website had said to you, oh, you must put the hare in a cage. And although you were so sure, so anxious that this should remain a wild hare, you were temporarily seduced by the idea that perhaps a cage would be good, and it turned out to be the wrong turning, didn't it?
Yes, this was I've tried to write openly about the mistakes I made, and I eventually, having been all at sea with how to look after a hare, since they've never been domesticated, as you say, there isn't really a manual for how to look after them. I did, of course, come across information from people eventually who had raised hares, because if you're a vet or working in a wildlife sanctuary, this is the kind of thing you do all the time. So I make no claim to have done something that no one's done before, far from it. But when I eventually, I'd been living alongside the leveret, running freely in the house, going in and out. I would leave all the doors open so it could always go outside and was never trapped. I came across a very good, very useful organisation that had information, and that said that I should put the leveret in a little sort of pen at night. And I tried that for a few nights until I realised, and this is not a judgment on their advice because it's probably very sensible in lots of circumstances, but I became very uncomfortable very quickly with the realisation that by putting the little animal in a pen at night, it had no way of getting away from its own urine, and they are absolutely immaculate animals. The way they survive in the wild is by never leaving any trace of their scent. They're not like rabbits. They can't go underground. So a hare grooms itself continually. You never see where they go to the bathroom. They sort of have a particular spot which a group of hares will use, but it's quite far from the places they lie in the daytime. So I grew very uncomfortable very quickly with the idea of a little everett not being able to escape its own droppings. So after a few days, I just got rid of the pen, and from then on never restricted the movements of the hare in any way possible. But I mean, there would be circumstances under which people who were caring for orphaned animals would have no choice but to keep them in a pen. But I just think that these are animals that suffer when restricted. Hares have been known to break their necks, frequently actually, leaping against the bars of a cage because their desire not to be constrained is so strong. There's something in a hare that resists domestications. Humans have never succeeded in taming this wild animal, even though we've managed to domesticate almost every species of animal. So even though they're small, they're extremely wild, and that's just as it should be.
Interestingly, though, there is a moment when the hare, I don't want to anthropomorphize your hare, but there is a moment when the hare appears to be requesting your help. So again, you have touched on this, so this isn't a plot spoiler, but the hare does have further leverets itself. And at one point you describe them playing on the stairs, and one of the leverets is not that skilled at stairs yet, and tips over the lip of the top step and goes splat on its face on the step below, completely unable to then get up, either up or down. And the hare itself can't intervene or help. So that you describe the hare sort of pawing at your leg, appearing to say, what do we do now?
Well, I'm not sure. I hope I don't describe it quite like that, in the sense it's very kind of you to put it that way. and to this day, it's obviously tempting to say that the hare chose to sleep during the day in my house, freely by choice, because she felt safe around me. Whereas I actually just think I was in the middle of her home range, and she tolerated me as a rather strange sort of hare that didn't quite do what hares were supposed to do. And actually, I wrote most of the book with the hare asleep every single day across the doorway to my office, so it's sort of as close to me as you are now. But the reason that she chose that spot is not because it's close to me, but it just happened to have a very good elevated view of the entire house and the garden. And that would be the place where she would feel safest. And I was very lucky that that was in my vicinity. But I can't say that it's for any other reason than that. And actually, I find that rather beautiful as a human being and as a writer, because obviously we're used to the idea that animals need us. But how much more beautiful is it if an animal doesn't need you, but is happy to coexist alongside you? And so the fact that I had to exercise restraint in not touching her, I didn't give her a name, I didn't treat her as a pet, I didn't think of her as mine, ended up producing all of these incredible experiences, including the fact that she gave birth in my office, and not just in my office, but behind the chair in which I sat to write the book. So I wrote the last third of the book with actually 3 leverets inside the house and the mother hare, so it got really quite crowded. But there was that episode where one of her leverets did get into difficulty, and I think it was just that I came into the room when it was happening, and ended up lifting up her little leveret and bringing it back up the steps and putting it where she wanted it to be. But I don't think she enlisted my assistance as much as just sort of I was caught up in this drama that was happening around me.
It's interesting you use the word drama, because actually there's another kind of drama unfolding, which is at that time, Chloe is on the phone having discussions about the fall of Kabul. So you have the return of the Taliban, and you're working with the situation which then confronts women in Afghanistan. So there you are in your office on the phone discussing Kabul, and the hare is there on the floor having a snooze on the carpet.
Yeah.
It's a really strange sort of conjunction of circumstances, aspects of your life.
Well, it ended up being quite fitting, because I think in a funny kind of way, with hindsight, that it actually didn't, it served me quite well that my work was foreign policy, that I was used to thinking about other countries and assuming that I knew nothing about them, which is always my starting point. I absolutely hate it when we come along with our assumptions and prejudices and sort of superimpose them on other cultures, and with the assumption that ours is somehow better or that we understand everything. And so maybe in a funny kind of way, I was conditioned to regard the hare as almost of an emissary of a wild land that I didn't understand, speaking a language that I didn't know, and therefore I should start from the assumption of not knowing anything. And I think as a writer, it's quite an interesting opportunity to sort of pare back yourself, pare back your assumptions. I think when we write about, other humans, we start with this assumption that we can interpret their behavior. There are written sources, there's language, there's the records that people have left or the things they tell us while they're alive. And with the hare, there's nothing of that. I don't even know, the absolute facts of when she was born. I don't know when she died or if she's died. I found that quite sort of freeing from a creative viewpoint, because it was really the opportunity to remove myself from the equation as much as possible when writing the story. And in fact, the only reason I appear at all is because my publisher said, we actually need to know who you are. You can't just be a disembodied voice, because I was really pushing for that idea. Why can't I just be a disembodied voice, and can't this be the story of the hare? I'm afraid I think I didn't answer your question. I got caught up in this particular thought.
No, I think you did answer it. You answered it actually very beautifully. But it does also make me think, what you've just said, about the conventional model of nature writing.
Mm-hmm.
That extractivist model, which is to say, I'm going to write about nature in terms of what nature can do for me. The idea that a forest is just waiting there, begging to bathe you in its light, that the ocean is just loving the fact that there it is with its little waves ready to run over your ankles, and it just is thrilled to be doing it, which is the worst, in my opinion, kind of nature writing. And you are doing anything but that. But were you consciously not doing that, or just instinctively not wanting to take but to give?
Well, one of the things I struggle with most about the book is that you write something, and there'll be people here who've had this experience, and you're not entirely sure what it is that you're writing, but you know how you want to do it. And I had certain ideas from a writerly point of view about how I wanted to tell the story and how I wanted to do justice to the hare, and I didn't want the form of the story to be so elaborate that it would be out of proportion to the subject. I wanted the elegance of the hare to shine through. I wanted it to be simple, and I didn't really want myself to appear in it at all. And I think, but one of the things I've struggled with is that retrospectively, you publish the book and then that gets interpreted, and inevitably, because of our society, everything is interpreted as a human change story. And the question I'm asked all the time is who I was before, not by you, you're much more subtle than that, but generally speaking, who I was before and who I was after, or how I changed. All of which is obviously, there's some element of interest in it, and I don't hold it against anyone that we think in those terms, but it becomes immediately human-centric, whereas I conceive of this experience as through a series of bumbling accidents and a few instincts about not trying to own this animal, I ended up having the opportunity to observe a family of hares at close quarters, for the veil to be lifted on one of the most secretive wild animals that we know nothing about, despite the fact that they are so mythologized, and they're on every Christmas card, postcard, notebook and mug and tea towel that you can think of. The actual life of a hare is a mystery. Most people only ever see a hare because it's running away in the distance. They've been labeled, Shakespeare calls, we might come on to this, hares are a byword for cowardice. Hares are a byword for madness, for lustfulness. If I had done this 200 years ago, I would have been carted off and prosecuted as a witch, because witches were believed to turn into hares in order to run around the landscape and carry out nefarious acts. So while I was working on the fall of Kabul, the tragic, appalling abandonment of the people of Afghanistan after what we had promised them and what we did, I was also conscious of my freedom as a woman. I could be by myself, living with a hare, writing a book, earning my living, and do so in safety. So I think also, I'm sorry if I'm drifting, but the other point about the work that I did is that you see yourself as very small in the grand scheme of what people actually experience in their day-to-day lives in other parts of the world. So how could I take my small, square inch of ivory with this hair as anything other than a small, delicate experience, which I was almost peripheral to, and as if I was almost a conduit for the story rather than the protagonist. I don't see myself as the protagonist of the story. So I think lots of things go into forming the sense of how I perceive nature and my smallness within it, and the fact that, as I say in the book, there's nothing original at all about a human being transformed and uplifted in some kind of way through contact with nature. So for all of those reasons, I felt a sort of reverence towards the subject, a desire to efface myself as much as possible and to simply allow the reader, I hope, to experience with some degree of clarity what it might be to live alongside a wild animal that in all other circumstances would fear humans as carriers of death.
The footprint in the book is very, very light, and I think you've managed that brilliantly. There is no ego in this book, which is actually remarkably difficult to do when you're writing in the first person. The ego is just throbbing away, generally speaking. But you managed to actually extract the ego completely. And I think that's why I got so exasperated by some of the reviews, all of which are absolutely stellar, so perhaps I shouldn't get exasperated by them on your behalf. But there is that tone of review which is along the lines of, I saw one saying, this book is a return to innocence. And it's actually not a return to innocence, it's a return to close looking and knowledge and study and egolessness. But it's nothing to do with that bucolic, let's go back to happier times and prance around making daisy chains.
Well, I've had to sort of learn to let it go, and I'd love to hear from anyone in the audience who's published and had this experience. But you just have to accept not being understood necessarily in the terms that you want to be understood, and then you also have to accept that if people are so kind as to embrace in any kind of way what you have written or painted or created, and if they see something in it which is completely the opposite to your meaning, that has value, and that is a legitimate response to what you've put out into the world. So, for instance, I am absolutely at immense pains not to anthropomorphize the hare for lots of reasons. And I don't see it as a sort of surrogate baby or a child. And I don't see the experience of the hare leaping the wall and then returning being akin to what motherhood or fatherhood might entail. But lots of people tell me that that's what they see in it. And at the beginning I would kind of flinch because I'd be like, it's not like that, it's not about humans, this is about a wild animal, why is it always about us? But then of course I realized, well, that's actually beautiful. I should not react in any adverse manner to the fact that, in the same way that somebody, I was thinking, as I was thinking about this event, I was thinking of that poem by Walter de la Mare. What's the title? I can't remember the title, but it has that phrase, this light is my seeing. And I feel like that sort of, in a very nebulous way, encapsulates how I think about nature writing and life writing, is that you have a particular light that's informed by everything you've read and experienced and perceived, consciously or unconsciously. But so I borrow from other writers all the time and say that idea means something to me, that means this to me, and I'm going to use it in the following way. So if people do that to my writing and are kind enough to do that to my writing, then who am I to say that they're the right or wrong? And I overall am very grateful for the reception. But I don't want to pretend I don't have an ego. I could probably just hide it better than other people, maybe, but I have an ego.
I can see it, you've done a good job. It's interesting, isn't it? There's a sort of irony in that conjunction between the review of the kind of Ode Return to Innocence kind of palaver and another one I saw which is all about this book, this relationship between a human and an animal, it's soul food. Actually, that was just terrible writing apart from anything else. But
it was soul food for me. I didn't use that expression, but it did enrich my soul.
True.
Whatever a soul is, if we're going to have that philosophical conversation.
But it felt rather extractivist, We can all read this book and then we will have lots of food for our souls. Yeah. But I think the bitter irony there is that there's this massive gap between the soul food thing, but also the willingness, that cavalier willingness as a society that we have to say the hare, unlike any other animal, is not protected by a closed season. So in other words, when the hare is looking after its young, it can still be blasted off the earth by someone with a shotgun. There are no rules governing the hare which govern other game animals. And people seem to sort of tolerate that at the same time as thinking, isn't it marvellous that this hare exists? What do you do with that irony other than campaign, which to a degree you have? I mean, you're getting a petition together, aren't you?
I think it's really interesting, and it goes back to that classic problem of what you name something or someone. And if you name an animal, or God forbid, a human being, as a pest or vermin, which, you know, we do apply that to even in horrible contexts, in political context. But if you do that to an animal, then of course we've created a situation in our minds where if you kill vermin, you do something good. You know, if you exterminate rats or mice, you're doing something good because they're vermin. And by extension, if you need to shoot hares all year round because they're pests and they're vermin, then you're doing a good thing. And actually, you know, the hare population has declined by over 85% in this country in just over a century, which is astonishing decline. And it makes me so sad that many people don't get to see hares. I go up and down the country and I meet a lot of people who've never seen a hare at all, and not just in cities. And so it turns out Scotland has a close season. They protect hares during the breeding season. Nearly all of Europe has a closed season, and England and Wales don't. And there are a handful of shooting estates that make a lot of money when at the end of, is it the end of January? When does the pheasant, anyway, when the pheasant shooting season comes to an end, in January I think it is, and you can no longer make money having people come and pay hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of pounds to shoot pheasants, you can run hare shoots. And people, you know, line up on the opposing sides of a field and drive the hares into the middle and blast them with guns. And they come from other countries to do it because it's not legal in most other countries. And it's horrible in my mind because these are animals that have nowhere to go. They're very large. They can't run underground. And you know, why would you take pleasure in shooting them? And it's sort of presented as a conservation measure, that they're doing it for population control in areas of the country where there are too many hares, because there are a few parts of the country that have quite a lot of hares, East Anglia being one traditionally. But I think it's just residual vested interests, and when I've raised this and just said, personally, I don't understand why anyone would ever want to shoot a hare, but that's my personal view. I'm not going to criticise anyone who has a different view. But can we at least agree that they should be protected during their breeding season? Because if you shoot a hare while she's pregnant or lactating, you kill all her young, essentially. And you can't tell. Male and female hares look identical, so you can't tell if you're... And they've done studies where they've collected the bodies after one of these hare shoots where they've killed 600 hares. And every single female is either pregnant or lactating. And that's just barbaric, really, in my view. Although that's not a very useful word to use, it's too emotive, but it's unnecessarily cruel and very, very bad for the population. But when I raise this, it's funny, I sort of, as a child, grew up in the country. I've been living in the country for the last few years, but there's this very sort of heated question of who gets to speak for the country, and some of the countryside organisations have been really rude about me, just pointing out this gap in the law and just saying, let's do in England and Wales what we do elsewhere in Europe. And so there's been some pushback, but the Labour government promised to bring in a close season. They trailed in the Financial Times that it was going to be in the King's speech, and then they dropped it at the last minute, whenever it was 10 days ago, when the King stood up in Parliament and the government had been going through all its political crises, so they've just dropped it as being too difficult for the time being. But I've not given up. I'm going to find another way of achieving this very, very simple change in the law. I feel it's the least I can do for hares, and it's one of the nice things about being a writer in our contemporary era. You can do both. Well, maybe it's always been the case. You know, you could be Wilberforce and campaign against slavery, and I'm no Wilberforce, but in the sense that you can write something and then you know, try to take your ideas and share them with people more broadly for a political purpose. So I don't know if I'm poacher turned gamekeeper or gamekeeper turned poacher, probably the latter, but definitely I'm going to do all I can for hares.
You describe also another way in which hares are obliterated. And this is an instance of, you know, once again, the hare being kind of caught up in the human machine, which is reasonably well-behaved farmers actually slaughtering the hares in advance of the threat that might appear from illegal hare coursing. get rid of the hares, then the hare coursers won't come.
Well, I have a lot of... I thought you were going to mention farm machinery, actually, but we can come back to that. But I have a lot of sympathy with people who are facing hare coursing, because it's very frightening.
And violent as well towards humans.
Violent, and the hare is not even central. It's just because that's how you race your dogs. You race them. Hares are the fastest land animal in the UK. So if you want to bet and gamble with dogs, that's what you set them on. And people have told me, I would never say who they were, respect their privacy, but they have told me, the problem is so bad where I am that I have to kill my hares so that I don't get hare coursers. And I've raised this with the government. I just said, look, there's got to be a better way of doing this. You've got to do more to help people with this problem. So it's not, I'm definitely, my brother-in-law's a farmer, and my sister's a farmer, and many of the farmers I know care more about the landscape than anybody else. But I write in the book about a byproduct of our farming machinery getting bigger and faster, and our practices becoming more and more intensive. This habit of taking an extra silage crop. The first kind of cut of silage taking place during the hare breeding season kills a lot of hares. Then lots of people, we in our cars kill a huge number of animals on the roads. It's not just farmers. But I write, there's a chapter called Blood in the Harvest about the fact that there's so many things that go into the making of our food that we don't really appreciate, and I didn't appreciate until very recently, including the toll on an animal like the hare that loves to hide out in the open in large open spaces that we use to rear crops in.
You do come up with some suggestions, though, and some of them are terribly straightforward. It just seems so logical and easy to achieve, such as stretches of grass, strips of grass along hedge lines, more hedges, less open land. So places for hares to retreat to or to conceal themselves. That seems sort of doable, and yet somehow it doesn't happen. Well,
there is a big wave across the country of people doing amazing things, either at large scale because they own a lot of land, or on small scale because, how common is it now that we see roundabouts that aren't cut? Obviously, there aren't going to be any hares on that, but it's great for other wildlife. So I try in the book, to sort of draw attention to some of the things that I've learned. I don't have a manifesto. I am not a conservationist or a farmer or an expert in really anything. I was once upon a time an expert in Iran's nuclear program, and I've lost my expertise in that more recently. But I'm not. I don't pretend to be an expert in this. But as a writer, because I didn't know I was going to write a book, I spent the first two and a half years of the hare's life just reading everything I could read about hares. And so when it came to the actual writing of the book, I didn't need to do any more research. I could just write. So I wrote the book very quickly, in the space of sort of less than 6 months, including all the drafting. And it was actually turned out to be a really good, for anyone else who's writing a book, it actually was very, very fortuitous to have synthesized all of this material, including these kinds of recommendations. But then, because I wasn't sort of copying them out of a book as I went along, I hope it's in a sort of, like digestible form, so the reader can nibble as if at a bowl of porridge oats or a raspberry, and not have an indigestible kind of 3-course meal of Chloe Dalton's ideas on conservation, which I would never presume to put forward.
That's an interesting method that you just described of the way you wrote the book. And I know there are people writing books in this room. So I think this is a really good moment to open up the conversation to your questions. So Alice has got the microphone. No need to be shy. And put your hands up if you fancy asking something. I feel sure that you will.
By the way, thank you for being here when you could be lying out on a beautiful grassy bank.
There's a question at the back. Can you see Alice? Almost the back row.
Hi, thanks so much. I really actually loved reading your book, so it's a real pleasure to listen to you. I just had a question. I was wondering, how is it that you actually came to write it as a book? And was it that while you were raising hare, were you sort of keeping notes? Because one of the things I love in the book is sort of the very intricate details you have about the everyday and, like the small minutiae of what happened during her life. And I just wondered, a bit about the process of it.
I took about 3 million photographs, as we all did during the pandemic, even more than normal. So I had a photographic record, which I didn't realize at the time I was building up, partly because I never expected the experience to last. And then on the day when the hare was 4 months old and she leapt the garden wall for the first time and disappeared into the wild, and had no reason, as far as I was concerned, to ever return, but then chose to return, I went to my desk, took out a notebook, and started to sort of make a few notes. It's not a diary. I've never kept a diary in my life, but I would, I've still got them. I could put some of the pages online if it's interesting, or remotely interesting. But I would note things like the time at which she arrived, or whether the weather was doing something particular that day and if it affected her behavior. So, and I wouldn't do it every day, but just when she did something interesting. So I had that to draw on, although I really didn't sort of write from it because I didn't want it to have that feeling of a journal. Not a huge amount happens in a hare's life, but it's a sort of drama of minute variation, and that shows how difficult the life of a hare is. And I'll tell you really honestly how the book came about, which is that the hare was 2.5 years old, had given birth in my office. I was doing my work, with these little animals concealed in the bookcase behind me. I was absolutely overcome with wonder at the degree of trust that involved. And I had a meeting in London with a really well-known literary agent for somebody else. So for somebody I was working for. And so this is a woman who would never have seen me otherwise. So this was a huge amount of incredible good fortune. So I went, and actually total lack of professionalism, which I'm happy to admit, but I went to this meeting and I had my full hour with this literary agent talking about this other project. And as I was leaving, almost out of a feeling of, I don't know, the meeting hadn't gone particularly well and I was probably gabbling a little bit, and I was putting my coat on and I said, thank you so much, I hope we have a chance to work together, and one day I'd love to tell you about an experience I'm having. And in some uncanny way, this woman, who I now know has no time in her schedule, told me to take my coat off and sit down and tell her about it. And I give her enormous credit because she took a kind of chance on another woman. And so I sat down and said, this is what's going on. Would you believe? And I showed her a few photographs, and she said, you should write a book. And I think a lot of us need that. It's almost that maybe I'm too deferential to authority, but the fact that somebody who was a person in the world of books said, oh, you could write a book, or this could be a book, gave me just enough confidence to attempt it. If I'd been sitting in the house, I would never have done this by myself. So it was a stroke of luck. Maybe I just took my chance when it arose, but I know that for everybody, the almost impossible thing is to get the foot in the door, to get your manuscript or your proposal looked at by somebody who will kind of see the intention. And I was lucky she got to see me in person, and I could kind of tell her about it like this, and that's how it came about. Sorry if it's a long answer, but that's the honest truth.
Thank you. Other questions?
Hello.
Here, Alice.
Thank you. I've really, really loved hearing what you've got to say. And I must confess, I haven't read your book, but of course I will now. But the biggest question in my mind is, given what you said about your work experience and how you found yourself in the place that you were, what prompted you to pick up this leveret?
Well, it's a very, very good question. So what happened is I just completely coincidentally was going out for a walk because the weather had been really severe and it had just eased, and there was this, I thought I should get some exercise because I was spending an unhealthy amount of time inside. And I'd opened the back door and was putting on my boots, and I heard kind of a dog barking very frantically, which is why I took the license in the prologue of describing it in that way, and a man shouting really quite volubly, kind of calling his dog, I'm assuming. And where I live isn't on a footpath, so it was an unexpected sound, so I sort of got dressed a bit more quickly and went out. And I walked sort of 200 meters, perhaps less, and I came across this little animal out in the middle of a track that's used by cars that runs down the side of my house. And so I stopped at a distance, and I describe in the book how, even though I had never seen a hare before, the word leveret surfaced in my mind, that somehow on some kind of level that I knew it wasn't a baby rabbit. A newborn baby rabbit would have no fur, its eyes would be sealed shut like a puppy or a kitten, and it would be underground. And this was a perfectly formed wild animal with its eyes open and these incredible ears and paws, in miniature, but the perfect miniature of an adult hare. And so my instinct was to stand back, take a photo from a distance, as we do, and go, wow, that's a leveret. I was a bit worried that it would be vulnerable because it was on a road and there are all these predators around, but I didn't touch it. And I sort of made a mental note of where the animal was, and I came back 4 or 5 hours later and it was still there. And at that point I started to think perhaps it's injured, perhaps its mother has been picked up by the dog that I've heard. And I had this idea that I would take it inside just for a couple of hours until nightfall, and then I would put it back where I'd found it. So I thought, if I take it out of harm's way, it won't be hit by a car, and I'll return it to the field. But I got home and I rang somebody who's a conservationist and told him what I'd done. And he showered me with cold water. He just absolutely fairly, he just said, its mother will never accept it. If she's still alive, there's a good chance she won't be alive. It'll still smell of a human home. And by the way, it'll probably die because leverets don't do well in human hands. They tend to die. And that was the catalyst for the whole experience, was a sinking feeling of dread that I had been the classic city woman, had come along and out of a good intention had intervened into an animal's life and it might now die. I write in the book about that was the moment in which I thought I've somehow got to work out how to undo this harm, if I did harm, or try to keep this little animal alive so that it can return to the wild. And I think because of that, because it wasn't an instinct to pick it up, I didn't have any pets in my life, because I was unwilling almost, or reluctant, that might have set the seeds for the decisions that I made fortuitously not to try to tame it and not to try to domesticate it. I hope that answers your question.
Other questions?
Thank you. I have read your book.
Oh, thank you.
So has my husband. We both enjoyed it immensely. And I was wondering how, as you get further away from COVID and you reflect on the fact that, if it hadn't been for that pandemic and you moving where you moved and all that time in isolation like you were, few people have a silver lining to the pandemic like you do. And I wonder if you could talk about that a little bit.
No, you're absolutely right. And that was another reason I was reluctant to write about it at first. I was thinking, this is not people's experience. People experience death and separation and not being able to be in the hospital with their loved ones and all of the terrible things and worry and fear, and not to mention what was happening in other countries that didn't have our resources. So I felt I didn't want to write a sort of rosy glow sort of story about here's my amazing pandemic. While you were making sourdough, I was raising a hare. Isn't it all wonderful and rosy? With the passage of time, I find it more and more extraordinary, that realization, which is again very commonplace, about how we try and plan out our lives and make decisions about what we need and what's best for us. And then the thing that has the biggest, or the person that has the biggest impact on you, is something or someone completely unforeseen that you would never have chosen for yourself. I would never. I would have, if you told I was burnt out, but I would have denied it to your face. I had my 3 mobile telephones and my constant travel, and I thought I had a great life of meaning and purpose, and I wasn't looking for change. I know some people sometimes are when they write this kind of book, which is why I resist it being a change story, because I was actually very happy in my life. But lo and behold, I was separated from nature, and I have learned through this experience to stitch myself back into nature as a human being, and had this it's insignificant on a global level, or even on a national or regional level, but hugely significant for me personally, this opportunity to write, to express myself. And as you know, in the book, I write about the fact I had this rather shocking realization that I had lived my life like a hare. I was perfectly camouflaged in the background of the lives of these very important, influential people that I worked for. And I wrote their voices and helped them achieve wonderful things, and I hope do some good in the world. But you could have searched high and low, you would have found nothing about Chloe Dalton. Not even most people at my stage in life have expressed themselves in some kind of way. I'd never written a single word under my own name, even though I'd written millions of words for other people, and I'd been all over the world, but there was no trace of me. I was like a hare. And I think actually, in a funny kind of way, you know how culturally we're encouraged to sort of idolize predators, the lion, the mythical animals, the lions and the eagles. And I actually think that living alongside the hares made me realize that I think we have some kind of ancestral memory of being prey, that we were once prey animals. We were once a small handful of humans in an utterly wild world, and almost everything around us would have eaten us or killed us. So we were a bit more like hares. So I actually think there's quite a lot to learn from hares and from looking at the life of a vulnerable, wild creature that's hard-pressed like a hare, and that there's lots of parallels with human life. And for me as a writer, it was just incredibly fertile ground, even though I wouldn't have thought it, because it seems so commonplace. It seems like an animal that we know so much about, and that does exactly the same thing every day of its life. And where would be the drama in that? But lo and behold, I found it to be full of drama and interest and beauty. And so I think that's the final thing I would say I've taken away from it with the passage of time. About I've learnt that beauty and interest, or even the subject for writing, doesn't have to be some grand, faraway thing, some great scheme. It can be something much smaller and much closer to home, and I find that quite liberating.
Thank you. Any other questions before we... Yes, here we are.
Thank you.
Hi.
Are there any? Is there anything that you can share about your upcoming project, Pet?
Oh, thank
including
you.
any lessons that you've learned from writing Raising Hare, any differences in approach, and how you're approaching the research for that upcoming project?
Thank you. It sounds like you're a writer. Are you a writer?
I'm not. Maybe aspiring.
Aspiring writer, okay, well, yeah. So, yes, my new book's called Pet, and it deals with a piece of unfinished business for me about raising hare, which is that I discovered that I have quite a different approach to lots of people around me to pets, and I didn't really realize this, to animals. A lot of people thought I should have given the hare a name, and some of my friends and family were irritated with me that I wouldn't sort of produce the hare on command, and I would have to explain I just couldn't. If you were lucky enough to sit in the house quiet enough for long enough and the hare chose to come in, you should consider yourself very lucky, but I couldn't just sort of hold it and produce it for you to pet, whatever. And I became really fascinated with this word, pet, and the origins of it and the negative connotations. And I'm really interested as a human being in those aspects of human nature that are both the absolute best of us and the absolute worst of us. And our attitude towards animals is one of those, exactly one of those cases. So I conceive of it as following in the paths that the hare left for me. Hares, they leave these incredible motorways across the fields that intersect with each other on the horizon, and you go down one, you don't know where you're going to end up. They're like these mazes that hares use. And when the hare disappeared from my life after 4 years, I found myself one day literally sort of walking out and following these paths. And I have decided to try to tell the story of where some of these animals came from, which I conceive of as a series of kidnap stories. Some of the origins of the animals in our lives are absolutely astonishing, and because we tend to see only dogs and cats, we sort of forget how many other animals are in our lives. And I'm writing about it, hopefully in the same sort of vein as Raising Hare, not preaching to anybody, sharing what I've discovered, using the fact that because I've worked in foreign policy, I don't mind going to funny places around the world to look at, not funny places, but, places that other people might not be very high on their sort of list of places to travel to. And so the process is very different because I'm writing while researching, which is new for me. Managing that tension is quite interesting. I have a habit of going down rabbit holes, for want of a better phrase. So that's one big difference. And then the second one is, whereas the story of the hare is very concentrated, one animal, one place, one person, only a few seasons. This story is as big as I might wish to make it. So I have to be very selective in which countries, which animals, and how I tell the tale. But it's for better or worse, it's coming out next year, and I am absolutely passionately in love with the subject. And for what it's worth, you haven't asked for this, but I'm going to give it to you anyway, my pearl of wisdom about being a writer, which is that as long as you believe in it so strongly that you would still write it even if no one else read it, because you just want to say it so much, and actually you enjoy the process so much because it's like a kind of beautiful love affair with a subject, then somehow that comes across on the page. So that's how I feel about Pet, which may be a way of preemptively insulating myself against it not being another Raising Hare, but I'm really, really enjoying it. And Raising Hare is like, for me, it's like as if I caught a falling star. And so I know another experience like that won't come along, but I'm really loving having the chance to write another book. And I would never have, had people, including many people, thank you so much in this room, not embraced the book, I would not have had the chance to write again. And I've discovered that I'm slightly addicted to it, so it's coming. But thank you for the question. And good luck with your writing. Come find me afterwards, tell me about it.
We have time for one more question, so who's going to provide it? Here we are.
Thank you so much for, it's been so interesting to hear you talk today. And you may feel you've already answered this, but I wondered if, because of your experience, you found yourself continuing to pay close attention to the wild.
Oh, yes. And it's amazing because it really repays attention. And I found one of the most enjoyable aspects of writing this book as a writer and a human being was trying to acquire a vocabulary to describe what I was seeing, realizing the paucity of my own vocabulary. I had a great vocabulary probably for foreign policy and nothing for grass and landscape and color. And so I found that really thrilling, that it is possible at any moment in your life to equip yourself with the words. The language is it's like paint, you can just draw a new palette towards yourself if you're lucky enough to be able to find and assemble the colours. And I now notice things I never noticed before. And I love the fact that it doesn't really matter how late you come to nature, that you can derive that satisfaction from it. And the fact that I have derived my own satisfaction doesn't detract from yours or shouldn't detract from yours. And so I feel like it's the great subject in a way. I mean, and a lot of people assume, lots of my friends, people who've known me for such a long period of time as this person that only really focuses on foreign policy or what's happening in other countries around the world, they think I've gone off in a completely different direction, as if I've left all of that. But it's just another way of talking about the whole. And for me personally, it feels like a more welcome, when everything is so heated. There's almost no room for an opinion about almost anything that's happening in foreign policy. No one wants to hear it. We're not short of facts and opinions. But somehow you can move people by evoking a sense of who we are as humans in the world and all the things we have in common. So it's a long-winded way of saying I'm fascinated by the wild. I am so disturbed that of all living biomass on Earth, only 4% is wild animals. 96% is humans, livestock, and pets. So we've got 4% left of the most beautiful, aspect. Again, not a resource, but just aspect of the diversity of life. We've gone so, in the space of 10,000 years, we've just totally reversed the position of humans in a wild world to humans in a world that we've almost got rid of everything that we could possibly consider wild. Not that that means it's all is lost, but I find my gaze really focused on that remaining slice of wildlife, because I feel like if we can preserve that, that's the key to everything.
And there is a sense at the end of this, I'm just going to conclude by reading the very final lines of your book, if I may, because although that 4% figure is a shocking figure, there is a sort of potentially redemptive, potentially optimistic note at the end. It's not manifesto exactly. I know you don't feel that you're writing a manifesto, but nevertheless, it is a sort of potential modus operandi. So you end by saying, our greatest strength as humans is our capacity to learn, and that of wild animals is their astonishing resilience. In the combination, I dare hope, lies the possibility of renewal, a vision of life and land as wild and free as the hare, for them and for us all. Do you still think that?
Absolutely. Absolutely, more than ever. And that's a beautiful, I mean, not the text, but that idea is a beautiful thought to aspire to, the sort of harmony of the whole. Not humans finding the solution to everything, but sometimes humans stepping back and then reaping the rewards of allowing nature to emerge and realizing the call of the wild, the pull of that imaginatively and on a human level is a very real, deep instinct in humans. And I'm still really hopeful, despite what I said a moment ago. And I owe that to the hare.
Thank you. And I know you all want to applaud wildly, because aren't we lucky to have heard Chloe speak? So thank you so much.
Thank you so much. Thank you. Thank you.